My name is Jason, and I was once in a haunted building. How, you ask? Well, that's a long story. A story that I'm going to share today. It begins when I was a mere 10 years old. That's when everything started. My mother hooked up with her boyfriend and never looked back. That was when I was 10. My father was also long gone by then, so I got tossed around between some relatives for some time before my aunt took me in. And that's where I stayed and grew up. That's also where I met a boy, Martin. Martin was a military brat from Kansas, but we got along really well. Better than all the other kids our age for sure. And that was when we were 12 years old. We became fast friends since then. Growing up with my aunt had been a little difficult because she put too much importance in good grades and degrees. She was always on my case, insisting that I study hard. She was really about sticking to the books. She also wanted me to at least graduate. But I had never seen anything good in coming out of high school and jumping into college right after, so I refused. Martin was of the same school of thought as me, so he did the same. But even after my refusal, my aunt insisted on focusing on my education, and that's how I was talked into taking up trade school by my aunt. I ended up taking up auto mechanics for 2 years. My boy Martin, however, did not. He instead started picking up odd jobs here and there, mostly in construction or hard labor and sometimes in moving companies. This did provide us somewhat of a freedom, but this lifestyle soon proved to be a difficult one, especially on the pocket. So that left Martin and I as two teens without any steady work and income, looking to get paid fast. When we were really struggling for some cash, Martin's cousin happened to come in as a savior. He mentioned that he had a job that would pay about $5,000 if done right, and he had us in mind for said job. We jumped at the suggestion, wanting to take on the job before somebody else took it. That was before he told us the actual job. His cousin, Jinx, wanted us to break into the old theater on the west side of town. We couldn't understand why he would want us to break into an old building that had been boarded up for over 5 years. And what would there even be worth stealing if nobody had been in there, creeping around for so long? And there was also the tiny detail in the back of my mind telling me that there had to be some catch. The job seemed ridiculously easy compared to the cash it was paying. But I didn't voice that out loud. Who would say no to easy money? Certainly not me. Jinx said that he had been scoping out the place for over 2 weeks and he was not going anywhere near that place. Instead, he would rather pay some knuckleheads to do the dirty work for him. And those knuckleheads were going to be Martin and me. He further told us that 3 of his buddies had tried breaking into the building initially. They were climbing into the building through the side window when his friends had heard a woman screaming. The screaming seemed really angry. And then they started hearing something big coming down the hallway. Whatever that was slamming something into the walls, coming right towards them. Hearing the screaming and that slamming sound growing nearer and nearer, they got so frightened that they decided to leave the place at once, running as fast as their legs could carry them. And with that encounter in mind, they also vowed to never return to that building. So, why did they want to get into that place so badly in the first place? Even when, according to him, it wasn't really a dangerous place. Answering that question of mine, Jinx told us that there were said to be some custom chairs in the VIP balcony that were made with 18-karat gold. A jackpot, he said, if he had seen any. He didn't want to give those chairs up to some other crazy heads that might also be after them, but he also couldn't find anyone that wasn't scared shitless enough to break into the theater to retrieve the chairs. When Martin and I decided to take the task on anyway, he proceeded to warn us further about the danger we were putting ourselves in. According to him, the place was very haunted, and we might not even make it out alive if whatever was in there was to find us. "And what exactly is in there?" asked Martin. "A woman," was the reply. "They say that there was a woman that lost her husband in the Civil War. She used to perform as a singer in that theater. And that was where she got the news of her husband's passing. It is said that she never left the building after that. No one saw her coming out. People say that she might have hung herself backstage. The theater later closed down back in 1979, but locals say that they sometimes see a woman walking around on the roof. She's always clad in all red, vintage dress with a rope hanging from her neck. People think it's the same woman who killed herself in the theater and now roams the hallways of the same building, haunting it. It was an interesting story to say the least, and frightening too. We would have been really scared if we weren't just two hotheads who thought they could face any type of danger together, and who were also in desperate need of some money. So we paid it no heed and took the job anyway. We got dropped off in the back alley, and we were told to call before coming outside. No one was willing to stand outside the building waiting for us to come out. They were too scared. So it was decided that they would wait in the car on the main road a little bit away from the theater building, and they would come get us as soon as we got done with our task and were ready to be taken away. As soon as we stepped out of the car, they raced back out of the alley, leaving Martin and I standing in the dust, staring at the empty space. We couldn't wait long, so we shook the surprise out of us and got to work. Martin forced open the wooden board covering on the window, clearing our way in. We waited a bit to see if there was any movement from the inside. When we didn't notice any, we took out our flashlights and switched them on and climbed into the building. The first thing I noticed after entering the building was that the building had a wet and damp smell to it. The kind of smell we get from the wet, rotten leaves after the rain. We moved our flashlights around, trying to look for the right way. Nothing looked to be the right way, or the wrong way. So we just chose a random hallway to check out first. We walked down the hallway, and it led us to what looked like to be a dressing room. It was covered in old clothes and drapes that had turned into nothing but rags with the passage of time. There was also a thick layer of dust covering everything, and that didn't change throughout the building. Every hallway or room we came across was covered in inches of deep dust. Another thing that didn't change throughout the building was the smell, wet and rotten. The building also had a really creepy feel to it. It was totally plunged in complete darkness. Light did not come in there from anywhere. It looked right out of some horror movie. It had also started breaking down in some places, but still, most of it stood strong, even after so much time. And then the cold feeling we first encountered stayed with us throughout, even as we walked into the auditorium. The auditorium was grand, with a huge stage and rows of seats that went back in a semicircle around it. It was also very high up. There were numerous balconies built around in the upper portion. I could just imagine the time when the place was first built and how beautiful it would have been. Its majesty and grace still shine through all the dust and the darkness the passing of time had left on it. I was so engrossed in my musings that I failed to notice we had reached the place we were supposed to. Martin smacked me in the back of my head to get my attention and pointed up towards the VIP section with his flashlight, showing the front of the chairs covered in thick blankets. We looked at each other, realizing that we were another step closer to getting that 5K. We started moving towards the VIP section when we heard a loud swishing sound. We looked up and saw a long, shadowy figure running around the top of the bleachers, hitting the boxes as it ran down the row. We halted in our steps, staring at the dark figure in shock. We hadn't noticed it in there at all before. We didn't even know when or where it had come out from. As we were looking at the figure, shocked beyond belief, all the lights started to come on. Even the stage lit up. We turned towards it and saw a woman standing on the stage. She suddenly started singing. And just as abruptly, music came on. The whole orchestra and everything. We could see the woman singing, but we couldn't hear anyone playing the instruments. Still, we stood there, captivated by her singing, up until she finished her piece. As soon as she did so, we heard a crowd of people clapping. We turned back around to see, but there was no one there in the chairs. There was no one in the hall, yet voices kept coming. Martin and I looked at each other and decided that life was more important than the money, so we turned around and ran out of the auditorium. As soon as we got out of there, we saw a shadow-like man standing near the concession stand, looking back at us with no face. We halted in our steps once again, thinking about what to do next. Maybe staying in the auditorium was better. We looked back at the doorway to the auditorium and saw a woman quickly walking our way. Wait. No, not walking. She couldn't be walking, because she had no legs. We both screamed bloody murder at the sight and ran down the hallway. By that time, we had lost any sense of direction. We did not know from which side we had come from and were just going. I took out my phone and tried calling Jinx or just about anyone for help. There was no network. I tried again, but instead, my phone went into a weird static mode and then turned off. I stared at it, watching our last lifeline die. There was no chance of outside help now, as I told Martin. We had to get out of there on our own. We kept running and just checking every door along the way, screaming at each other, wondering how to get out. Just as we turned a corner, we came face to face with the woman once again. We skidded to a halt at once. She was standing in front of an arched hallway, staring at something on the wall. A painting, I realized. She was wearing a red dress. She might just be floating on the ground instead of standing on it. We backed away from there, but couldn't go back the way we had come from. We could still hear voices and thundering noises coming after us. We turned to the other corner, the only way out, and there were stairs. Our only escape was to go upstairs, so we took it. We sprinted up the stairs and out of there. As soon as we got out, we closed the door and tried using our phones once again to no avail, so we decided to just take the emergency escape route. We were on our first landing when the woman in the red dress stepped out from the door and onto the rooftop, and before we even had any time to process what we were seeing, she jumped down to the fire escape, landing right in front of Martin. We stumbled back in fright, Martin a little bit more than me. Being this close to the woman was not proving to be very good for him. I felt like now we were absolutely trapped. We were at the edge, so there was no way down, and the scary woman was right in front of us, so there's no way to get past her either. I was absolutely terrified, not knowing what was about to come next for us. But I knew I could not just give up. I had to at least try to save myself, to save Martin. Martin was actually trembling in fear right beside me. He was going to be of no help whatsoever. I knew it was all up to me now. I tried to think of any way that I could help get us out of the situation. Anything that I could use as a weapon to defend ourselves. I looked around us, trying to find anything helpful, when I realized I was holding my flashlight in my hand. I decided to use that as a weapon. So with all the strength that was left in me, I took a swing at the woman with my flashlight, hoping to cause enough damage that might distract her. That would have given us some time to get away from her. But alas, that was not to be. The woman actually grabbed my arm while it was still in the air. It never struck her, or even reached near her. She held my hand in the air and turned to me. I squirmed around trying to get my arm out of her hold, but to no avail. Her grip was really firm, uncomfortably tight, and the more I tried to free my arm, the tighter her hold became. It reached to a point where I feared it had cut off the blood circulation in my hands. My fingers even started going numb. So I gave up the fight and stopped struggling to free my hand. Otherwise, I think her grip might have even broken my arm. So I stopped fidgeting and looked at the woman. She was already looking back at me, appearing amused, if anything, at my struggle. She gave me a once-over. It seemed to be a very calculating look, as if she was deciding what to do with me. I looked over to Martin and saw him to be shell-shocked. He was frozen in fear, his eyes as wide as saucers. He was going to be of no help again, I realized. The poor guy was out of his wits. He had not even tried to run and get away from there, even when he had a slight chance while she was gunning for me. He was that far gone. She must have found the answer to the question she was looking at me with, because in the next moment, she picked me up. with using just the grip she had over my arm. My eyes widened in shock. My limbs started flailing around as soon as my brain got the message that I was now airborne. But I did not even get enough time to process this new predicament, because in the next moment, she had gotten me over her head, holding me up with her arms, and in the next one, she threw me down below, off the roof, to the ground. I screamed, and for a moment there, I felt my heart sinking in fear. I was so terrified of what I thought was going to be certain death, I almost pissed myself. I was so sure that I was definitely going to break my neck in the fall and die that my whole life flashed before my eyes in mere seconds. I shut my eyes tightly and braced for the impact. And I got the impact. But not with the ground. I landed in a dumpster. I laid there for a bit, coming back to my senses. As I got a hold of my bearings and thanked the stars for my luck, I looked up at the building roof, the one I had just fallen from and had not even broken a bone in the process. I looked up and saw the woman. She gave me a dismissive look and turned back to Martin. He was still standing there, rooted to the place, but he was now looking down at me. I wanted to tell him that I was going to get some help for him, that I was now out of the building. I wanted to tell him that I would come back for him with some authorities or something and get him out of there too. I wanted to tell him that I was going to save him. I wanted to give him some assurance, any assurance. But I didn't get the time to do so. I watched as the woman moved towards Martin and picked him up this time. She picked him up and proceeded to carry him back into the building. That brought me back fully to my senses. I shouted and screamed at the woman to let him go. I shouted to Martin, telling him not to worry one bit as I was screaming and scrambling, trying to get out of that forsaken dumpster. I felt some hands grabbing me. I stopped moving at once and turned towards that person abruptly, ready to throw hands once again. It was a policeman. That's when I realized there were police cars in the area, and there were policemen scattered around. Some were gathered around the dumpster trying to get me out, while most of them were looking up at the rooftop. I looked up too, and as if on cue, all of us together watched the woman in red taking Martin back into the dark building. The policeman helped me up and pulled me out of the dumpster. I turned towards them and saw that all of them were standing there, some looking up at the roof of the building, some looking at me, and some talking in whispers to each other. But none of them seemed to make a move. That puzzled me quite a bit. They were all there and all saw what I had seen, all that had conspired. They must have realized that whatever was going on was wrong. They must have been here because they must have gotten knowledge of these happenings from somewhere, somehow. But they were not doing anything to help my friend. I turned towards the officers that had helped me get out of the dumpster and asked them, what are they waiting for? I asked them to go after the woman and rescue Martin. They both looked at each other and laughed. I got even more confused. There was nothing to laugh about here. One of the officers said that they were all here as a formality because they had gotten information that they could not ignore, but they were told to not do their duty. The truth was, they weren't actually there to go into the building and help. The officer further informed me that the building had been getting a lot of break-in attempts over the past 2 years, but everyone knew not to ever break into this theater, at least not anyone who had a working brain. Then he proceeded to rant about the immature teenagers who thought they knew better, the idiots who wanted to prove how brave they were and whatnot. But I tuned it all out, thinking about Martin and how I could help him. And then my brain caught him saying that this theater was America's most haunted property in the state of Michigan. I felt like I lost all hope of ever seeing my friend again. The last words that the police officer had said before they all left still haunt me to this day. We've been getting people coming up missing here since 1979, and you're lucky that you're not on the list, but your friend, he has definitely been added to the list of missing people.